Today, we're diving into one of the most explosive revelations of 2026, a story that connects Jeffrey Epstein, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump's former chief, strategist, in an unprecedented campaign to take down Pope Francis. Welcome back to the channel. What if I told you that one of the most notorious criminals in modern history and a powerful political strategist joined forces to target the most powerful religious leader on earth? What if their secret communications revealed a conspiracy that went deeper than anyone imagined? This isn't fiction. This is real, and the documents have just been released. The newly released Department of Justice files have blown the lid off a dark alliance between political operatives, convicted criminals, and conservative elites who saw the Pope not as a spiritual leader, but as a geopolitical obstacle that needed to be removed. Buckle up, because what you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about power, politics, and the Catholic Church. Let's start with the basics. In June 2019, while Jeffrey Epstein was still a free man, just weeks before his arrest, he was exchanging text messages with Steve Bannon. Now, for those who don't know, Steve Bannon was the chief strategist for President Trump, the mastermind behind Breitbart News, and a man who openly declared his mission to dismantle the establishment. Jeffrey Epstein? Well, we all know his story. A convicted a financier with connections to the world's most powerful people, and a man whose death in a Manhattan jail cell sparked countless conspiracy theories. But here's where it gets chilling. In these text messages, Bannon writes to Epstein about a documentary film based on a book called In the Closet of the Vatican by French journalist Frédéric Martel. The book exposed secrets about homosexuality within the Vatican, claiming that 80% of Vatican clergy were gay. Controversial stuff. But what Bannon wrote next should make your blood run cold. Quote, "We'll take down Francis. The Clintons, she, Francis, the, come on, brother." End quote. Let that sink in. A former White House advisor is texting a convicted criminal about taking down the Pope. And this isn't just loose talk. This is part of a coordinated strategy. Bannon wasn't just some random commentator. He had influence. He had networks. He had media, empires at his disposal. And he was actively working to undermine the leader of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. Now, you might be wondering, why Pope Francis? What did this man do to earn such powerful enemies? The answer tells us everything about the real battle being fought behind the scenes in our world today. Pope Francis wasn't your typical pope. He was the first pope from Latin America, the first from the global south, and the first in modern history to consistently challenge the political and economic powers of the Western world. From the moment he was elected in 2013, Francis began speaking out on issues that made the wealthy and powerful uncomfortable. He criticized unfettered capitalism, calling it the dung of the devil. He demanded nations welcome migrants and refugees, directly contradicting the xenophobic policies of right-wing populist movements across Europe and America. He spoke about climate change as a moral imperative, challenging fossil fuel industries and their political allies. He preached mercy toward LGBTQ Catholics and divorced individuals, shifting the church's tone from judgment to inclusion. For nationalist movements that wanted to use Christianity as a cultural weapon, as a banner for Western civilization against immigration and globalization, Pope Francis became public enemy number one. He refused to play their game. He wouldn't let them hijack Catholic teaching for political gain, and that made him dangerous. Enter Steve Bannon. Bannon had his own vision for the Catholic Church. He wanted a church that would align with right-wing populism, that would see Islam as an existential threat, that would embrace a narrative of civilizational conflict. Bannon openly talked about creating a gladiator school for conservative Catholic warriors in Italy. He cultivated relationships with conservative cardinals who opposed Francis. And when he met French journalist Frédéric Martel, he saw an opportunity. According to Martel himself, who spoke to Religion News Service, Bannon told him he loved the book in the closet of the Vatican. They met in Paris at the luxurious Hotel Bristol, where Bannon pitched the idea of turning the book into a film. Martel says Bannon was very enthusiastic about the project. Why? Because the film would expose scandals, fuel outrage among conservative Catholics, and ultimately weaken Francis's authority. But here's where the story gets even darker. Bannon wasn't working alone. He brought Jeffrey Epstein into the conversation. Now, we have to ask, what was Epstein's role? The messages suggest Epstein was positioned as an executive producer for this documentary that never got made. A convicted pedophile financing a film to undermine the Pope? The irony is sickening, but it also reveals something crucial. This wasn't about theology or faith. This was about power, money, and influence. Epstein's emails show his contempt for Pope Francis. When the Pope visited the United States in 2015 and stayed near Epstein's Manhattan residence, Epstein wrote to his brother, "I thought I'd invite him for a massage," followed by disgusting remarks. This wasn't just disrespect. This was a man who saw religious authority as something to mock and manipulate. But Epstein's interest in the Vatican went beyond personal contempt. The released files show he was fascinated by Vatican finances. He read books about the Vatican Bank, studied the collapse of Banco Ambrosiano in 1982, and corresponded with cybersecurity experts about using Vatican City as a testing ground for digital currencies. One email from 2014 discusses using small sovereign states like the Vatican and Monaco for blockchain experiments. Epstein was always looking for opportunities, always calculating angles. And there's an even more disturbing detail. An FBI report included in the Justice Department's release mentions a source claiming that an Italian cybersecurity figure, described as Epstein's hacker, may have held a Vatican City passport. Let that sink in. Was Epstein's network infiltrating the Vatican itself? Now, not everyone in the Catholic hierarchy was comfortable with Bannon's schemes. In fact, one prominent conservative cardinal, Raymond Burke, who had been a vocal critic of Pope Francis, actually distanced himself from Bannon when he learned about the documentary plan. Burke wrote in a June 2019 letter that he was not at all of the mind that the book should be made into a film. He cut ties with the Dignitatis Humani Institute, a conservative Catholic organization that had become too closely associated with Bannon. Think about that. Even a cardinal who disagreed with Pope Francis found Bannon's tactics unacceptable. That tells you how extreme this campaign really was. The timing of these communications is also crucial. June 2019 was the height of conservative opposition to Francis. Conservative cardinals had already issued formal challenges to his teachings. Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, the former papal representative to the United States, had published a letter accusing Francis of covering up abuse by Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. The pressure on Francis was immense, and behind the scenes, Bannon and Epstein were coordinating their moves. Emails from 2018 show them complaining about the Vatican's opposition to xenophobia, racism, and populism. They criticized the Holy See's relationship with China. They saw Francis not as a spiritual leader, but as a geopolitical obstacle. In their worldview, Francis was aligned with the Clintons, Xi, and the EU, all forces they wanted to destroy. This wasn't about Catholic doctrine. This was about a vision of the world where borders are closed, markets are unregulated, and power is concentrated in the hands of a wealthy elite who use Christianity as a cultural shield while rejecting its core teachings about compassion, justice, and human dignity. Pope Francis stood in the way of that vision, and so they try to take him down. Now, it's important to understand that they didn't succeed. Despite years of relentless attacks, propaganda campaigns, and attempts to delegitimize him, Pope Francis remained Pope until his death. His authority didn't come from American media or political elites. It came from a global church whose center of gravity had shifted to Latin America, Africa, and Asia, the very regions whose lived experiences shaped his moral vision. The people loved Francis. The poor loved him. The marginalized loved him. Because unlike the powerful men who plotted against him, Francis actually lived the values he preached. But the story doesn't end with Francis. According to recent reports, the same forces are now targeting his successor, Pope Leo XIV, the first American pope. The cycle continues, because for certain political and economic powers, any pope who refuses to serve their agenda becomes an enemy. What does all this mean for us? It reveals something fundamental about the world we live in. Power doesn't like to be challenged. When religious leaders, moral voices, or public figures speak truth to power, they become targets. They're not removed through official processes. They're delegitimized through media campaigns, smeared with false accusations, and subjected to endless propaganda until people lose trust. This is the playbook, and it's being used everywhere, not just against popes, but against journalists, activists, politicians, and anyone who threatens the status quo. The Epstein files have given us a rare glimpse behind the curtain. They've shown us how power operates in the shadows, how conspiracies aren't always grand master plans, but networks of influence, shared interests, and coordinated messaging. Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein didn't have the power to remove a pope, but they had the power to try to destroy his reputation, to weaken his moral authority, and to create doubt in the minds of millions. And in our media-saturated age, that's often enough. So what can we do? First, we need to recognize these tactics when we see them. When powerful people suddenly turn against a moral leader, ask yourself, what is that leader saying that threatens their interests? Second, we need to support voices of conscience, even when they're imperfect, even when we don't agree with everything they say. Because the alternative is a world where only the powerful get to speak. And finally, we need to remember that truth matters. Documents like the Epstein files matter. Journalism matters. Accountability matters. Because without these things, power operates in total darkness, and we're left with nothing but propaganda and lies. If this story shocked you, if it opened your eyes to how power really works, then do me a favor. Like this video, share it with everyone you know, and subscribe to the channel because we're not done exposing the truth. There are more stories like this, more conspiracies to uncover, more powerful people who need to be held accountable. The fight for truth never ends. But as long as we keep asking questions, keep demanding answers, and keep shining light into dark places, we have a chance. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.